Dear friends, we just have another 2 or 3 minutes to go. We will start right on time, as usual. Dear friends and colleagues, a very warm welcome to all of you for the second lecture in our series, Culture in Crisis. This program is presented in collaboration with the Museum Society of Mumbai, the Kala Ghoda Association, the Sindhi Culture Foundation, and the Bihar Museum Society. And we thank all of them for coming together for this rather pertinent issue. Most of you know that our last lecture in the series was held on the 30th of August, where Mr. Mukherjee discussed some of the most challenging and poignant issues around culture under threat. He gave examples from various historic and contemporary events where cultural edifices and objects were destroyed, attacked, and looted by fundamental forces, colonial forces, and mindless development devoid of culture. Today, Mr. Mukherjee will be speaking on the subject of the Kahu Jodhara Buddha Stupa of Milpunkas. He has been researching this for over 10 years. He first published his findings in 2008 in the Marg Journal on Sindh, which was edited by Pratapaditya Pal. Ever since, he has shared his further research and subsequent writings in various journals and articles. Today's theme, Discovery, Destruction, and Virtual Reconstruction, the story of the Kahu Jodhara Buddha Stupa, will reveal and reflect from our collections of over 300 fragments from the edifice, which are now in our collection. It is also quite fortuitous that Mr. Mukherjee is authoring a book on the subject titled The Lost Stupa of Kahu Jodhara, an attempt at reconstruction, which will most likely be released on the 10th of January 2022 on the occasion of our centenary. The objects and fragments are now being documented and researched fragment by fragment in great detail under a global project sponsored by the Bank of America. But telling the story from the context of cultures and cultures in crisis is very important. In fact, this is why history is important. It provides enough and strong case studies that can truly provide a toolkit for our future. Milpunkas is one such remarkable story. I now request Mr. Mukherjee to speak. There will, of course, be opportunity for a few questions in the end. Mr. Mukherjee, over to you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you all for attending the part 2, the last in the lecture series, Culture in Crisis. Today, I am going to narrate a true story of a monument which was once as important as Sarnath, Takshila, Amravati, Ajanta, and Devnimori. Unfortunately, very few people know about this Buddhist establishment, which was once located at Kajudaro, about half a kilometer to the north of the present town Milpunkas. Today, the district headquarters of the Thar and Parker in the province of Sindh. Can we have the first slide? Probably it was one of the longest surviving magnificent terracotta Buddha stupa in the northwest part of ancient India. In ancient times, Kajudaro was a trade crossroads and cultural meeting place between India, Central Asia, and Afghanistan. And this is something, please keep it in mind. Can we see the next slide? the second one. So here is the content of today's presentation. First, I'll be talking about the early history of Sindh, particularly the footing of Buddhism. And then I'll be discussing the geographical location of Jodhara. That's very important for all of us to understand. And then the discovery of Jodhara Stupa. That's going to be very interesting for many of you. And Sir Henry Cousin and his contribution, the excavator who excavated the site. And the next point, I would like to discuss the religious and historical significance of Jodhara, and then the systematic destruction of Jodhara Stupa. Finally, reconstruction of Jodhara Stupa, and I end with the relationship between an object and a museum. Since I'm a museum director, so I always end with the museum. Let us understand the early history of Sindh, particularly the footing of Buddhism. When and how Buddhism found a footing in Sindh region is difficult to establish owing to the paucity of archaeological and literary material. At the same time, it is evident that Buddhism took deep root in the Gandhara region during the time of the great Mauryan Emperor Ashoka. It continued to expand in the subsequent period under the supremacy of the Indo-Greek, Scythian, Parthian, and Kushana dynasties. More particularly, the Sinkot casket inscription from the Bajor in the northwestern frontiers proves that the great Buddhist Indo-Greek king Menander propagated Buddhism between Hindu Kush and Sindh. In the Buddhist tradition, Menander is said to have converted after a conversation with the Buddhist monk Nagasena. Can we have the next slide? This is important for all of us to know and understand exact location of Milpunkas. And if you look at closely, you see the the Mohenjo-daro. The distance between Mohenjo-daro and Milpunkas is about 350 kilometers, and the distance between Milpunkas and Dewnimori in Gujarat, that was equally important. 5th century, 6th century Buddhist monument. And then you look at Pitolkhora, the location of Pitolkhora. Pitolkhora and Dewnimori almost 500 kilometers. Can we have the next slide? Here we have the map of Sindh. Thanks to Mark for sharing this map. This is very important. The great river Sindhu, if you can see Indus, river Indus, passed through the valley from north to south and acted as important trade, religion, and cultural connection for the Indus Valley, Punjab, and to the region of Gandhara. This connection has had immense impact on Sindh's social, cultural, economic, and political history, making it more porous border on cultural crossroads in historic time. Soilendra Bhandare describes this cultural cross connection in his article, Coinages at the Crossroads, the Monetary Heritage of Sindh. I quote, "The Indus Delta makes up for the maritime networks have ensured Sindh's links not only with Kutch and Gujarat, lying immediately to its south, but also across the Arabian Sea to the eastern coast of the Arabian Peninsula and to the Persian Gulf," unquote. Traveling in the northwestern regions of Sindh Valley in the 629-645 CE, the Chinese traveler Yuan Zhang wrote in his memoirs, I quote, "When Tathagata was in the world, he frequently passed through the country. Therefore, Ashoka Raja has founded several tens of stupas in places where the sacred traces of his presence were found. Upagupta, the great Arhat, sojourned very frequently in this kingdom, explaining the law and convincing and guiding men. The places where he stopped and the traces he left are all commemorated by the building of Sangramas monasteries or the erection of stupas. These buildings are seen everywhere, unquote. He also wrote that in the several Sangramas in the area, a large body of priests numbering about 10,000 practiced Buddhism. Can we have the next slide? All that survived of these Buddhist monuments of Sindh into the 20th century were remnants of several ruined Buddhist structures scattered around the valley. The one exception was a Buddhist stupa at Kajudaro in Milpunkas. Much of this monument lay buried under the ground almost in its original condition, waiting to be unearthed by archaeologists at the beginning of the 20th century. And now we need to understand the discovery, how it was discovered. Like many great archaeological finds, the Buddhist stupa at Kajudaro was also a chance discovery. The site was initially noticed by General John Jacob, 1812-1852, who was then acting commissioner in Sindh, but he did not apprehend its historical significance. The site was described as a great heap of ruins. But interestingly, in 1859, James Gibbs, a senior British official, described the site as a remains of brick platform or thul, and had excavated the upper part of mount, though he does not appear to have followed scientific excavation methods, but he was very careful while removing a fine earthenware pot from the top strata of the hollow chamber, which contained some pieces of crystal and amethyst. You can see the site before excavation. Unfortunately, the whereabouts of these finds remained unknown for many years, but recent research reveals that the earthenware pot was deposited in the Karachi Museum, Pakistan. After Gibbs' unscientific exploration, surprisingly, we do not see any activity at the site until 1890, when Sir John Woodburn, 1843-1902, later collector of Hyderabad, accidentally rescued a large painted terracotta seated Buddha image. Can we see the slide? Look at. Now in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection, and also the head of a second image from railway contractors in 1894. Unfortunately, we have no information about the head of the second image, but I strongly believe it must be with the Victoria and Albert Museum, and he deposited both the seated image of Buddha and the head of Buddha, and the head of Buddha second image with the V&A. However, the historical as well as religious importance of Kajudaro Stupa remained in darkness till the British archaeologist Henry Cousins, then superintendent of the Archaeological Survey Western Circle, excavated the site in 1909-1910. It was actually Mr. Mackenzie, the Deputy Commissioner of Hyderabad, who requested Cousins to spare a day to visit the site in February 1909, as the government wanted to use the rest of the bricks of the mound to fill up cavities in the adjoining area. According to Cousins' first visit to the site, he wrote that he was, I quote, surprised to find that there was so much of the stupa, which occupied the center of the north end of the general site, still remaining, unquote. One of the finest terracotta Buddhist monuments was thus saved from extinction. Henry Cousins had already resolved at that time, I quote, those images which I removed will eventually be housed in the new Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay, unquote. According to his desire, a large number of antiquities obtained from the excavation were shifted to the Prince of Wales Museum, now the Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. In 1919, the collection consists of 297 molded bricks and architectural fragments, 5 large seated Buddha images in high relief, and a smaller image in a frame, a standing male figure in relief identified as a devotee, 2 roundels depicting the image of Kubera, a few rectangular bricks bearing the image of Jambhala, a large number of sun-dried clay tablet, and also a tiny fragment of stone depicting a Jataka scene. Can we go back, Henry Cousin's portrait? Yeah, he is at work. Henry Cousin was well known for his work among the monuments and antiquities of Western India. Born in 1854, he joined the Archaeological Survey of Western India in 1881, was promoted superintendent 10 years later and retained that post until his retirement in 1910. For the first 20 years of his official service, he was engaged exclusively on the cataloging and surveying of the monuments in his charge. And during this period, made many fine series of architectural drawings. He himself was a first-class artist and draftsman. Most of these drawings were subsequently published either by Cousins himself or by Dr. James Burgess. Cousins did much valuable work in repairing the historic buildings of Ahmedabad, Chapanir, Bijapur, and many other famous sites in Western India. And he also carried out excavations on the site of Brahmanabad and Kajudaro, Buddha Stupa in Sindh. He was also one of the members of a reconstituted museum committee of the Bombay Museum, later Prince of Wales Museum, by the government in 1906. Cousins wrote on 19th October 1904 to the secretary of the Museum Committee, Bombay. I just read the collection I am now making with that already gathered together by the BBRS, Bombay branch of Royal Asiatic Society, would form the nucleus of the antiquarian branch of the museum, unquote. He passed away in London in 1933. It is a fact that the cultural heritage of Northwest province was first time came to the light because of Cousins' systematic survey report. Before that, very few people knew about the Northwestern province, the cultural heritage of Northwestern province. What was the religious and historical significance of Kajudaro? Can we have the next slide? The largest and most comprehensive collection of finds from the Kajudaro Stupa being at the CSMBS, it provides a rich source to examine the religions as well as artistic activities of the 5th, 6th century inhabitations of the site. It is significant that except for images of the Buddha, the site has not yielded any outstanding Mahayana images. Though several contemporary Buddhist monuments in the eastern and western parts of India are replete with Bodhisattva figures, the considerable remains from Kajudaro do not even indicate the possibility of a Bodhisattva image here. However, the presence of Kubera and Jambhala images, can we have the next slide? Tenuously, the next. Yeah. Tenuously connect the site with the Mahayana tradition. Moreover, the inner part of the stupa structure made of sun-dried bricks. From a study of the site, it is obvious that the original stupa structure was erected by devotees of Orthodox Hinayana Buddhism who had only marginally accepted the Mahayana principles. The fact is corroborated by the records of contemporary Chinese travelers Huenzhang, the second quarter of the 7th century, mentioned that Buddhism was at its peak in the Sindh region, and the local ruler was a Buddhist. Yi Sing, 671-695 CE, observed that the Samitiya sect of the Hinayana tradition dominated the region. The Samitiya sect had been quite popular and widespread during the 3rd and 4th century, as is evident from one of the earliest inscriptions at Sarnath, which states that around the 3rd century, this sect drove Sarvastivadin out of the place. Later, they became more prominent at the time of Harshavardhan, 606-647. Yi Sing also recorded the presence of a large number of monasteries of this period from Ahichatra, Shravasti, Vaishali, Sarnath, Kapilavastu, Malwa, Vallavi, and the Sindh region. It is very likely, therefore, that the original sun-dried brick stupa structure in Milpunkas was purely Hinayana in character. In all probability, it had existed at least for a couple of centuries before the introduction of Buddha images. The Mahayana influence is evident in the 11 Buddha relief panels, must have been added later as a result of the Samitiya sect accepting the image of the Buddha in their religious practices. Can we go back? Let everyone look at beautiful Buddha images. I just pause for a second. Go back. Okay. Next. Buddhism survived even after the Arab conquest of this region in 711, as is evident from the presence of hundreds of unbaked clay votive tablets and Arab copper coins found at the entrance of the stupa. Most of the tablets bear an inscription under the image of the Buddha or stupa, and it is written Ye Dharma in character of the 7th or the 8th century, similar to those found from Nalanda. So this is interesting to note because the stupa was in worship until 9th, 10th century. The bricks found at the site, can we have the next slide? The bricks found at the site were in a great variety of patterns and of fine workmanship. Being stylistically akin to similar remains from the Gandhara region, the Hellenistic influence in ornamental details was apparent. Among these designs were several forms of freight, checkers, rosettes, palmettes, T patterns, stylized leaf, acanthus, figurative motifs, and other motifs. Next. Kajudaro is perhaps the only Buddhist site in this region which has yielded so many relief panels of the Buddha images so far. Stupas at other sites in the region, such as Thulmirukan, Sudharan Jodhara, and Diparkhangro, were probably also exclusively decorated with terracotta work. Now I'm going to discuss how this beautiful stupa was systematically destroyed. Can we see the next slide? Unfortunately, recent images of the site indicate complete destruction of the main stupa, including its plinth levels, as well as its surrounding, which in original case remained intact many decades, even after the Cousins excavation. I have information since I was doing research on Kajudaro. This portion, this much portion, the plinth level, it was intact until 2012. Directorate General of Antiquities, Government of Sindh, Pakistan, describes the site on their website as part of tourism. I quote, about half a mile to the north of Mirpurkhas is a great heap of ruins known as Kajudaro, unquote. As was the case in Mohenjo-daro, you all know the story of Mohenjo-daro. The stupa at Mohenjo-daro was built with Harappan bricks, Mohenjo-daro bricks. And a large quantity of bricks, Mohenjo-daro bricks, was used for laying the railway track. So that story everyone knows. So here also we find the similar kind of story. The bricks of the mount at Kajudaro Buddhist stupa monastery were also extensively used after 1890 for laying the local railway tracks and construction of buildings. Can we see the next slide? Yeah, here you could see, Mohenjo-daro stupa at the end. Sir John Woodburn, 1843-1902, collector of Hyderabad, accidentally rescued a large painted terracotta-seated Buddha, probably the image of Buddha now spotted in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection, London, and the head of second image from railway contractors in 1894, which I already mentioned. And he wrote a small note for Journal of Bombay Branch of Royal Asiatic Society issue, I quote, the two photographs are of figures that were dug up some time ago in an old Buddhist tower in an ancient town called Kahu near Mirpurkhas, about 50 miles east of Hyderabad in Sindh. When the Hyderabad-Umarkot railway was being made, the contractors excavated bricks in this old tower, and these figures together with some ornamental bricks were picked out and spared, unquote. An article published by the Express Tribune posted by unpo.org on January 10, 2012 reports, I quote, the survey found that several sites, including the ancient Buddhist sites of Kajudaro and Dhamrao-jo-daro, another site, in Mirpurkhas, Larkana districts, where the Buddhist stupas were found are fast vanishing, unquote. The newspaper writes further, I quote, scores of other sites are also threatened as encroachers continue to take over them. They are not interested in preserving the sites. Some of these ancient monuments are being used as cattle pens. The threat to historical sites is not just posed by encroachers. The illegal activities of builders and miners have contributed to the decay of Sindh's history, unquote. In 2013, can we see the next slide? We received a very disturbing photograph from a Mirpurkha student of architecture. She was working on Indo-Saracenic style, expressed her desire to have a couple of photographs of the museum building. And I took advantage asking her to share the latest image of Kajudaro site. And she was very happy to do that. So here, the image, showing the entire Kajudaro stupa site has been flattened now. So this is the unfortunate story of complete destruction. But there is some, good thing. The collection, the major part of collection came to this museum. An attempt has been made to reconstruct Kajudaro. I'll be happy to show you how Kajudaro stupa actually looked. Can we see the next slide? At the time of, oh, sorry, just show the video. I forgot completely. Can you show the video? If it works, all right.
20वीं सदी के शुरुआत में इसकी खुदाई हुई, क्योंकि उस वक्त ये जो रेलवे ट्रैक्स थे ये बिछड़े थे, और उन रेलवे ट्रैक्स के बिछने के दौरान जो खुदाई हुई उसमें इसके थोड़े आसार मिले, और फिर गोरों ने इसकी आके खुदाई की, और कहा जाता है कि सिर्फ उस वक्त इसकी 2.5% खुदाई की गई है। अब तक 100 में से 2.5% खुदाई की गई है, उसमें से ये स्तूपा मिला है। आप देख रहे हैं कि अभी तक ये ईंटें यहाँ पर मौजूद हैं। अगर इसकी थोड़ी खुदाई की जाएगी तो ये पूरी दीवार निकल के वाजा आ जाएगी। तो उस वक्त कहा जाता है कि यहाँ से जो है वो काफ़ी कुछ मिला, कुछ गुलदान मिला जिसके अंदर शायद हीरे के टुकड़े लगे हुए थे, और काफ़ी टेराकोटा की मूर्तियाँ मिली जिनमें से 7 सर्वाइव कर पाई 11 में से, और उनको इंडिया भेज दिया गया। और अफसोस की बात है कि यार आज इसको कोई देखने आता ही नहीं है, ना ही कहीं आपको मीडिया में कोई इसकी वीडियो या कोई फोटोज नज़र आएंगी कि लोग इसको प्रमोट कर रहे हैं, इसके लिए कुछ कर रहे हैं।
Thank you. At the time of excavation, Cousins observed that the stupa had suffered some structural imbalance due to the weight of the upper tower pressing more directly upon the walls of the square plinth, as a result of which the walls showed signs of subsidence and bulging out. The walls had been subsequently fortified by providing an additional outer layer. According to the excavator, this had helped in preserving the images, decorative bricks, and other artifacts on the walls of the square platform of the stupa, and so for so many centuries. Here we look at the plan. It was facing towards west. And there were three miniature shrines within the stupa on the ground level. I think, yes, Renuka is able to show 1, 2, 3. And outer line, you can see the outer line, the protective layer that was added, sometime in 2000, in 7th, 8th century, just to give some kind of support, because the stupa was reconstructed many times. An effort has been made here to reconstruct the Stupa of Milpunkas, one of the few examples of decorative stupa architecture in the Indus Valley, with the help of surviving architectural fragments and other artifacts in the collection of the CSMBS. It would have been difficult to imagine the original shape of the stupa merely on the basis of these fragmentary remains. However, interesting this in the light of other contemporary stupas enable us to get fairly accurate idea of the original stupa of Milpunkas. So we had to study contemporary stupas in the region. Fortunately, there are few remained intact, and that gave us, a lot of clues, understanding the architecture. What is interesting at Jodhara, if you look at the base, I'll be showing you the elevation. This is the plan. On the east, the entrance, it is west-east oriented, west the entrance, and on each side, south, north, and west, you will find altogether there are 11 Buddha images. They were placed in niches, and 2 windows with lattice design, 2 corners of the side. Unfortunately, I'm unable to show you. That's the problem with the technology. But you can understand, it is written, the positioning of all Buddha images, that is something we studied. Yes, those are the lattice window, corner. Can we have the next, the elevation? Yes. One can easily imagine the magnificent scene around the stupa in the valley of Jodhara. The main stupa with its harmika stood nearly 20 meters tall, inspiring approaching devotees and pilgrims from a long distance from all 4 directions. With its towering presence, thousands of local devotees and those from all over India and perhaps other countries as well must have thronged there to pay their respects to the great souls whose corporal remains were enshrined in the stupa. There were two relic caskets within the stupa. Both the casket came to this museum in 1919 when Cousin handed over the collection to the trustees of this museum. And later on, after independence in 1960s, government requested the trustees to hand over both the relic caskets to Mulagandhakuti Bihara Sharnath. So today, when you visit Mulagandhakuti Bihara, probably they don't show. I went there, I could not see them, but they acknowledge that the Milpunkas relic casket is with us. Approaching from the west, if you see the entrance, approaching from the west, they would have reached the main entrance of the stupa, which must have been embellished with the decorative bricks and possibly with a torana, as we see at Sanchi. Torana means gate. Passing through the gate, they would make the routine circumambulation. The tradition is still followed in all three major religions of India: Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jain. Around the platform, which held in its center the relics and which supported the gigantic stupa. While circumambulating, they would have passed the visual gallery of seated Buddhas in the niches. I already explained, on each side, west is the entrance. It is east-west oriented. Yes. Inside, there was a group of 3 small shrines that already we discussed, and Renuka tried to show with the arrow mark, most likely containing images of the Buddha, as indicated by the presence of elevated rectangular pedestals in the center of each square shrine. The only remnant from these small rooms is a large terracotta bas relief of a standing man. Can we see the next slide? About 76 centimeters tall, which was found leaning against the north wall of the central shrine. The image, in all probability, represents the donor disciple, the only secular image found so far. This could be, the donor merchant, according to me. And this image was found in one of the shrines. The roofs of the shrines were vaulted with corbelling brick patterns, a tradition that prevailed in the region even during the Indus period. On either side of this group of shrines, a pair of staircases led up towards the west to the platform above, as if for pradakshina around the circular tower. The highly embellished square platform, can we see the next slide? Yes. The highly embellished square platform of the stupa was about 6 meters above the ground and nearly 18 meters square, excluding the Pancharatha, 5 projections. You can make out. I'm sorry, I can't show you, but the projections are very much visible. One can make out at the middle of the west face. The walls on either side of the entrance in the west face of the stupa, above the molded base, were divided into 4 bays. The corner bays were larger and possibly once contained blind lattice windows within frames. The other 2 bays on either side of the entrance were each decorated with a panel containing a smaller image of a seated Buddha in a frame of peculiar design. We can show you. Can we have the next slide? Yeah, this one. The small Buddha image. Okay. Okay, you don't have. It's all right. The great tower missing of the stupa was once highly embellished with 1 or more bands of pilasters. with image niches between them and numerous string belts of decorative motifs and moldings of sculptural bricks. The presence of a large number of fragmentary molded and ornamental bricks at the site indicates its close similarity to the stupas of Thulmidrukan near Moro, Dipar Khangro near Brahmanabad, Sudharanjudaro near Tando Muhammad Khan, and the one near Jirak. The grandeur of Milpunkas Stupa Tower, nearly 18 meters tall, excluding the Harmika and umbrella, could be compared with Amravati Stupa in southern India, as well as the highly embellished tower of Dhamek Stupa at Sarnath in northern India. The tower with Harmika above was possibly crowned by wooden erection in the shape of a great triple umbrella. We may restate that the original sun-dried brick structure found at the lower level of the Kajudaro Stupa at Milpunkas was probably belonged to the earliest period. Can we see the next? 2nd, 3rd century BC, and later underwent major structural changes during the 4th and 5th centuries, as is apparent from the presence of a large number of curved and ornamental bricks of that period. The normal size of the bricks is 42.5 by 25 by 7.5 centimeters, which again corresponds to that of the bricks of Gupta shrines, such as those at Bittergaon, Ter, and Devnimori. So here, the comparative, unfortunately, we lost the stupa. The whole area is flattened, but here you could see and imagine how the stupa looked in those days, and the seated Buddha images in niches all around. So that was more like a gallery. People used to take first pradakshina around the stupa, and then they used to climb up and take another pradakshina. Can we have the next slide? We thank Henry Cousins. Yes, I was talking about this image. It was on the west side, west face. It's a beautiful Buddha image. You could see Central Asian influence. This is one of the images where you get to see Central Asian influence and Akanthas as background. We thank Henry Cousins for his initiative in shifting the collection to the then Prince of Wales Museum for its safety. His anxiety about the safety and security of all archaeological sites in Sindh region reflected time to time in his annual reports in 1909, 1910. Now let us understand the role of museum in society building and its relationship with the collection. I will also try to address the possible difficult question which we often ask, why do museums acquire objects? Can we have the next slide? Each object is made for a particular purpose and geographical location, and then would it be ethically correct to confine them in a place or building with whom they have no connection? Museum as an institution holds an important place in the society because it does not only tell the story of man and the world and how humanity survived in its environment over the decades, but also because it houses things created by nature and by human in the past and the present. Thus, it is important for the changing society and nation. Museum is not the building or an object, but an idea. It shares space with cultural fragments, irrespective of their geographical locations and histories, provides them shelter and protection on a sustainable basis, and helps them to connect with the world. Neil MacGregor describes it, I quote, "The whole point about museum is that they help you to sort out your place in the world. It is in a museum that you can look at your own past and think about your relation to it," unquote. That is more important now than it has been for a long. What is collection? Collection is a group of objects made of different materials, tangible, and countless traditions and conventions, intangible heritage, sourced from the past and the present, directly or indirectly linked to human creativity, history, religion, politics, crafts, conflicts, nature, and its surrounding, which take us back to that particular time frame and reveal their fascinating stories. Cultural heritage is frequently contested issue. Many uncomfortable questions, such as our heritage and their heritage, for whom and by whom, have been raised with regard to ownership and preservation of cultural heritage within culture or between cultural context. These questions are unnecessary in the context of rising extremism in Afghanistan, Mali, Middle East, and West Asia. We need to tell people that heritage is not only bricks and stones, but our identity. And destroying heritage means destroying the social fabric of societies. Thank you.
Very much, sir. That was again another wonderful, wonderful journey through long years of your research. Here's a question from somebody. They're asking that the wonderful video that was shown mentioned that during the excavations, some antiquities sent to India. So some are obviously with us. But what were those other objects, and did they go somewhere else?
I have little information. Some antiquities from the excavated site were deposited with the Karachi Museum.
Right.
Some, a part of Kajudaro excavated material came to this museum, the Prince of Wales, now Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaja Vastu Sangrahalaya. And two images, according to my research, one already, VNA acknowledged, and it is on display, the seated Buddha image, but I suspect even the head of second image is also with them.
Right. Okay, sir. There are many congratulatory notes coming for you, particularly the last lines that you said about heritage and about them not being just bricks, but our identity. They are really being appreciated. There's also just one more question, which is actually a little about how is it that, culture that is at threat from natural disasters, how is that being addressed today in today's time? Would you like to address that one last question, sir?
Yeah, this is, it's a collective responsibility, particularly a country like us. India is blessed with heritage. Every kilometer, as you cross, you find something, and it's impossible for government to maintain so many monuments, so many structures. But if we come together, institutes, people and the government, then definitely, we can prepare some master plan and something can be done. Again, I say it's a collective responsibility. Government alone cannot manage.
So just one last question being asked, that why was Cousins so concerned about the preservation of Kahu Jodhara site and objects found there? Were there any specific issues that you think he was worried about? Is there any information about that?
I really don't know. But his anxiety, it's not about Kajudaro. The entire Sindh region, there are hundreds of monuments in the region. He was really worried, and that reflected in his writing. And he wanted to shift, some important artifacts to Indian Museum, Kolkata, to Prince of Wales Museum, because Prince of Wales Museum was under construction then. Though it was one of the major museums in the Bombay Presidency, and Sindh was a part of Bombay Presidency then. But anxiety reflected in his writing.
Right. Okay, I think we are ready to close. There's just one comment which says that if you have visited Kahu, Jodhara, and we know you haven't yet, but I'm sure given an opportunity, you would be delighted to do so.
Absolutely.
But with that, I think we do draw to a close for today's evening. It was an absolutely engaging and very visual discussion today, which I'm sure our audiences have enjoyed. And this is yet again one of those opportunities where we are seeing collections from our museum come out like this in so many numbers. So thank you again for giving particularly our young scholars this opportunity to delve into collections from the museum in this immersive manner. I thank everyone for attending today, and please be in touch. Please look out for us on our social media pages where we will be announcing our future lectures and talks as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukherjee.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you.